It is Niall Boylan with you for the next hour or so. Let's get straight to it. Helen McEntee says she will not be deterred by protesters or violent protesters at the Coolock site. Now, I've been reading over the last couple of days different opinion pieces on what's going on in Culok. In case you're unfamiliar with what's going on in Culok, as you well know, the old Crown Paint Factory has been taken over by the government, and they will be putting in their people who have come to the country seeking international protection. Now, reading from Grip Media, by the way, the government is currently looking at more than 30 large buildings for use as accommodation for migrants and asylum seekers, despite the clashes and the unrest in Culok this week, as the Gardaí moved to facilitate development of a site for accommodation for hundreds of asylum seekers. They also say in response to Senator Michael McDougall has said he understood that people felt fear and apprehension about the future for the local communities if large numbers of people are accommodated in single centres in certain locations. Also, according to the IPAS statistics, 10,604 persons have applied for asylum here since January 2024. That's an increase of 93.9% on the figure for the same period last year. The highest number of applicants is from places like Nigeria, Jordan, Pakistan, Somalia, Bangladesh. And that was reported up to June the 30th, 2024. Last time I looked, there was no wars or no particular wars in those countries. So most, as predicted, don't qualify. They're economic migrants. Now, according to Ben Scallon from Grip Media, the population of the Republic of Ireland may exceed 7 million by the year 2057 under a high migration scenario examined by the Central Statistics Office. According to the new data released today, the range of the projected Irish population by 2057 varies widely depending on the different migration scenarios. Depending on the amount of net migration per annum, the CSO scenarios see the Republic of Ireland's population reaching 7 million, 6.4 million, or 5.7 million respectively by the middle of the century. Now, John McGurk also reported on this week on the riots in Coolock, saying, "Yesterday, amidst the rioting and the violence, I noted the usual sniffy snark from the well-to-do Middle Ireland. It's well for them. They have the time to be burning out Garda cars on a Monday afternoon when the rest of us are out at work." Because, of course, the perpetrators of yesterday's protest and the day before's protest / rioting were in a substantial part drawn from the ranks of the unemployed and arguably unemployable, according to John. And the government are suggesting now, of course, that the plans to procure more buildings like this will continue. They say they're engaging with locals. Of course, if you believe telling locals it's happening, whether they like it or not, is actually engaging. But I assume they're telling the truth. But John McGurk also says the rioting we saw yesterday happened in a large part because those who rioted feel as if they've nothing to lose and everything to gain from taking the law into their own hands. Are they wrong, he says. So the question is, are they wrong? The question I'm asking today is nearly 2 years later, after these continuous protests on an ongoing basis, probably more protests than I've seen through my whole lifetime, to be honest with you, in the last 2 years, it's not actually making a blind bit of difference. The government are still motoring on with their plans, and they're not really interested in what you have to say about it. Because the question is, really, can the government legitimately continue to do this and cause this unrest? Because that is the root of the problem. I mean, all they do essentially is, and you've seen it over the last 2 days, is they will villainise the protesters because, of course, there are always going to be individuals within a protest who will cause trouble. Joining me, and I want to get your opinion, by the way, it's 085 100 22 55. Please text or WhatsApp. If you want to come on the air, just WhatsApp the number 085 100 22 55. But joining me is John McGurk from Grip Media. John, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Niall. How are you? Niall, can I just clarify something there when you read out the bit where I said people were unemployed and unemployable? I'm not saying that that's my opinion. I'm not saying that, in my opinion, they're unemployable. I'm saying that's the narrative.
The narrative, of course. No, I'm not suggesting
about
you.
These people.
Yeah, they're kind of looking, well, this is what the government have been doing for 2 days. It's kind of villainising a community. Now, we understand, and by the way, everybody condemns or should condemn violent behaviour, setting fire to buildings or setting fire to mattresses or whatever they're doing. We should all condemn that. But the idea that the government, every time these protests happen, be it in Newtown and Kennedy, wherever it happens to be, they just villainise the protesters. That seems to be the way the government operate.
Yeah, look, I mean, as Ben Scallon, my colleague, pointed out this week, 2 years ago, they had a memo. Now, the memo related to Ukrainian refugees, not asylum seekers, but it's the same difference, really. And the memo to Cabinet said that, look, if you start putting large numbers of people into socially disadvantaged communities in particular, you're going to, and this is what the memo said, it's not me saying it, said you're going to undermine social cohesion and cause unrest. And yet that is precisely what they're doing. I'm struck this week that there are 2 communities experiencing the same thing, and they're 2 very different communities. There's the community of Dundrum in County Tipperary, which has a population of about 163 people, which has just been told that it will play host to 280 international protection applicants. And then you have the events in Coolock, which we're all familiar with. And it strikes me that those two communities have something in common, which is that in both cases, the sites that are going to accommodate these people are sites of government failure. I mean, in Coolock, we're talking about the former Crown Paints factory, which closed down for the last time in 2016, which used to employ 150 people in the local community and which has never been repurposed to any other source of employment for locals. And now that hope has been taken away from them, and instead they're getting, any number between 500 and 1,000 migrants being moved into their community who will be...
What is the number, John? Because I've heard mixed reports both on UK television and GB News and here in Ireland, anywhere between 500 and 1,500. Do we have, how many can the building hold? Do we know?
There's no fixed number, but we saw mattresses being moved in. Presumably, a large space like that you could accommodate, a couple of thousand people if you really packed them in. But we don't know. That information hasn't been made available. It could be, but it's in the hundreds. Certainly in the hundreds, and there was some talk of up to 1,000. And we know that what the government are planning to do, as you mentioned in your intro, up to 30 what they call large-scale facilities for hosting people. Now, there are 26 counties in the state. That's more than one per county. And by large scale, I take it we're talking more than 1,000, more than 1,500 people per locale. So these are large scale facilities. And then in addition to that, you also have what's happening in Tipperary, where you have hotels being taken over en masse, and the Dundrum House Hotel is going to be hosting 280.
But John, just sorry, before you go any further, the maths doesn't work out on this, because Michael McDougall pointed out the mathematics on this going back a while ago on the House of the Oireachtas when he talked about how many people can actually be, applications can they do on a single day versus how many people come into the country every single year. And then, of course, out of those people who get rejected, many will make an appeal, which they're entitled to do. That will then have to be looked at as well and processed too. And he worked out the staff could do so many people, and no matter how many staff you bring in, even with the extra staff. So realistically, if we have a predicted, 27,000, which is what is predicted this year, possibly 30,000 next year, I don't know. We don't know what the numbers will be next year. According to the European Union, the numbers are going up. More people are coming into Europe on a regular basis. So if we keep doing that, 30 places won't be enough at 1,000 people in each, because where are they going to go from those reception centres? Are we suggesting we're going to get a house for them or accommodation for them when we already have an accommodation crisis and 14,000 people on temporary housing list, also another 70 or 80,000 people on a housing list as such? So where are they going to go from there? Because surely at some point we have to say the 80 or so percent that are not genuine asylum seekers have to be returned or sent back to where they came from. At what point are we going to do that? Because that's where this problem lies. Because we could treat the ones who are genuine, we could treat them so much better, support them so much better, if we didn't have to accommodate the ones who are not genuine.
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, when are we going to start deporting people is really a question for the government, not for me. But you're on to a point which I think is a really important one. And I've written about this several times, which is the basic supply and demand situation. I mean, if you are, imagine it in an economic terms, if you are producing something, let's say you're a new phone producer and you start producing 5,000 phones a year, and then you're told that a market is actually going to buy 30,000 a year, you're going to increase your production. And it's the same with immigration. If we send a signal that we can accommodate 30,000 people, then 30,000 people will come to take up those accommodation spaces. And when they've come, we're going to need more space and more space after that. And so the government keeps responding to this increase in demand for accommodation by frantically trying to increase the supply rather than by trying to reduce the demand. And I mean, it would seem to me, and I think it would seem to most people logically who understand mathematics and basic laws of the market, which apparently politicians don't, that what you do in this situation is you disincentivize the demand for housing spaces by making it more difficult for people to come here. I mean, we have just seen this week in other countries in Europe, I think it was the Finns, actually put in a law saying we can arbitrarily reject asylum seekers. Now, their law was predicated on the idea that these were people coming from Russia as part of what it calls asymmetric warfare, where Putin was sending people across the border to cause difficulties. But the point still stands. They've said in some circumstances we can just say no, you're not getting into the country.
But we don't have a deterrent. And I talked about during my campaign, of course, for election, I talked about the triple D, which was, the detention, the deterrent and the deportation. But the deterrent is ultimately the most important thing. And we saw that with the Rwanda plan when the Rwanda plan existed, going back a couple of months ago in the United Kingdom, where as soon as the suggestion of you were going to Rwanda or you got a letter saying, listen, you're part of the plan, barristers and solicitors for those people, you were saying, look, your best bet is to go to Ireland. There's nothing we can do this. It's gone through the Supreme Court, etc., etc. Now, that's been scrapped, of course, by Keir Starmer. And that problem is going to get worse because more and more people are now going to start coming into the United Kingdom. So they're going to come here as well. So that we don't have the deterrent. The deterrent is deportation, ultimately, and fast processing. But we don't have that.
No, and it would be very difficult to. I mean, the thing about the deportation system is that, I mean, you really need to get on here and interview Niall as a barrister and ask them why the legal system facilitates such endless appeals. Because it's okay for the government to say, we're going to deport you. But I mean, by the time that person goes through their legal right to appeal and review and judicially review and appeal again and maybe go to Europe in exchange.
Oh, it's 10 years. Yeah. And they've already lived a life and their circumstances changed and they've had 2 kids and all of a sudden then we can't send them home and they'll just put in an application to the Minister for Justice for the right to remain. But okay, getting back to what's happened in Coolock over the last 2 days, we're now into day 3. I've no doubt it'll be happening again, sadly, because we don't want to see people in those situations. I mean, there is always going to be an element that caused trouble. And my argument in this, and I was talking on British television yesterday, was that when you've got an area like Coolock, and I was raised in Edinburgh, just around the corner, that's where I was born. But when you, see these areas, the only interaction that most of these kind of 16, 17, 18, 19-year-olds have with the police, or the only interaction they've ever had, has been bad. I mean, you don't see very much community policing going on there, going around checking on 12 and 13-year-olds, making sure they're not getting into trouble and being friendly with them. The only interaction is bad interaction. Police are bad. Guards are bad. So, as you rightly said, in their eyes, they've kind of nothing to lose. But do protests in general, when we've seen 18 months of these protests across Ireland, and and they've all kind of ended up the same way more recently, do they serve any purpose then? I mean, does protest work at all now?
Well, protest only works to the extent that it generates political pressure that forces politicians to change their views. That's the point of protest.
That hasn't happened, has it?
And that hasn't happened, and I think in this case is unlikely to happen on the basis that, I mean, the government parties have kind of looked at the election results. They've said, look, we can silo off that anti-immigration vote. Clearly, in an area like Coolock, it's doing more harm to Sinn Féin than it's doing to us. It's not hurting us in our constituencies. Fine Gael got 51% of the vote in Stillorgan, where there's no migrant centre. So on a very purely cynical level, which they would never admit, they don't care about it. But the other point in relation to protests is that, I mean, asylum is the one issue where they have taken it out of the legal system altogether. So I was looking today in The Independent, there's an article today about a woman in Howth who's objecting to the building of, I think, 120 apartments in Howth, saying that the construction of 120 apartments in that lovely part of Dublin would alter the character of the area. And she's taking legal objection and she's submitting her objection on board to NOLA and she's slowing the whole thing down. Asylum centres are the only development that can be inserted into your community without any kind of right.
You've no veto over it. No.
You've no veto. You've no. So the government has actually taken away. I mean, I wrote a piece.
But here's the thing, John. They're never going to put an asylum centre in Howth.
Well, they may or may not. It seems to me to be unlikely that they will. But
no.
The point is that in these areas they've taken people's right to object away. So I wrote that piece yesterday, and the title of it was "Why I Won't Condemn the Protesters." Now that doesn't mean that I endorse the burning of cars or JCBs or the firing of missiles at Gardaí. What I mean is it's pointless. And besides that, it's very hard to condemn people when they've been given literally no other option if they want to put a stop to the facility that they object to. Because the government for the last 20 years in this country has been trying to build something called the North-South Interconnector, which is basically a power line that goes from about Meath across the border into Northern Ireland that the government say is vital for our fight against climate change by bringing in power from the north.
Yeah.
They haven't been able to do it because residents who object to that have been able to slow it down, delay it legally, clog it up in the courts. Now, you might say that's madness, but it is the law of the land for literally any other development except for asylum centres which have a planning exemption where the government can simply impose them. And now they all say, oh, we'll consult, but they can literally impose them without consultation. And has any, with this business of the government saying they'll engage in consultations with communities, my question for politicians and journalists would be this: can they cite one single example of where consultations have resulted in one of these centres not going ahead?
I mean, but I mean, you had Roderick O'Gorman yesterday up on his podium telling, people, look, we've engaged. This is more or less saying the protesters are not telling the truth. We're telling the truth. We've engaged with the community. Engaging with the community doesn't consist of we're building it, we're putting them in there, and that's the end of it. Because that seems to be what engagement means on their behalf.
Yes. So, I mean, I would love to know from Roderick O'Gorman, for example, if he says that they've engaged with the community, can he give us 4 examples of changes that have been made to the operation of this proposed centre on foot of that engagement? Because I guarantee you the answer is no. Engagement from the government tends to mean a lecture. So it means, oh, well, your objections are clearly because you're a racist, so here we're going to bring somebody in to tell you why there is no danger from this and you shouldn't be racist. There, we've engaged, now why are you still protesting? That tends to be what they're talking about here. Whereas actual engagement, even if you go through a normal planning process, let's say you succeed, let's say that planning process in Howth finally goes ahead, and they succeed in being able to build their 120 apartments over that woman's objections. The chances are going to be in that situation that the people building the thing will have had to make changes to their plans. They'll have had to maybe put in more gardens. They'll have had to paint it a certain colour. They've had to protect local
reduce
birds,
the numbers
whatever.
a little bit, maybe, whatever. Yeah,
reduce the numbers from 120 down to 60, whatever the case may be. And that kind of engagement with the community is kind of compelled by the system. Whereas when it comes to immigration, there's no compulsion to engage with locals at all. So these protests, as I said, are going to keep continuing to get worse. And I think they're going to get more violent, and I think they're going to get more desperate as people, there was somebody who said the other day, I think I heard them in audio in the background of some footage that Fatima Gunning recorded when she was at the protest. Somebody saying, look, the only way to stop this place is to burn it to the ground. And
that's not the answer either.
One cannot endorse burning things to the ground. But in terms of the legal operation of how this has all been set up by the government, that's also sort of a factually correct statement. So that is the position in which the government has placed communities, where they feel they have no other option if they want to stop something. They can't go to the courts. They can't go to their local politicians. They can't go to the council to stop the planning of it. So the only objection they feel, and we've seen this in communities across the country, with these arson attacks, which are terrible, but this is the reason why it's happening, because people have been given no other options. And, that is the position which the government is placing communities in the country and then calling them far right. I wrote a piece a couple of months ago saying it feels like the government is at war with its own people. And I was accused of all sorts of incendiary language by saying that. But if you're on the ground, I mean, I'm not going out burning buildings. I'm not going out attacking Garda cars. But if you put yourself in the position of somebody in Coolock who feels really passionately about this issue, and you ask them, well, what options do they have besides, number one, sit down and take it, or number two, take the law into their own hands? The government is putting them in this position where they no longer feel like they have anything to lose by going down option B, which is taking the law.
Well, it's that old rule, isn't it? When you back a dog into a corner, it'll bite. And unfortunately, that's the situation. Now, getting to the policing that we've seen both in Newtown and Kennedy and now in Coolock over the last 2 days. Drew Harris, of course, has taken no nonsense. He was in Coolock Garda Station for most of the day yesterday and the day before. I've watched some of the videos, and look, yes, you have to fight fire with fire, and yes, there are thugs throwing bottles, yes, there are people misbehaving themselves, yes, there are people setting fire to things, and they have to be dealt with, and what they're doing is illegal, and you can't just have a free pass for people who break the law. I get that as well, but civil disobedience is a part of protest. But with some of the policing I've seen is reminiscent of Northern Ireland, from the 1970s. I seen one guy standing against a wall. I don't know what he did before the video started. Maybe he did do something. Maybe he threw a missile. I have no idea what he did. But when the 4 guards ran towards him, he was like about 200 yards away from the protest, and they ran down. He was just standing at the wall. He put his hands up, didn't resist arrest, yet they pulled him to the ground violently, stood on his neck, beat him with a stick, or one of the nightsticks or whatever it is the riot police have. And then, the riot police officer went off, came back again, start beating him again. The guy wasn't resisting. They had the handcuffs on him at that stage. And I'm going, this is not the style of policing I want to ever see in Ireland. If you go back in time to the May Day riots of whatever it was, 2002, I don't know that you remember those, the May Day riots. RoboCop, remember RoboCop? The police were called out for that kind of behaviour. And, that was a huge story at the time. I remember covering it on the radio. The police were called out for, the abuse of authority and the over-abuse of authority and the way they police that particular situation. We're seeing exactly the same thing now, but it just seems to be acceptable, that type of policing.
Well, it's a class thing, isn't it? And I mean, I think it's very important to say this. I mean, classism is the issue in Irish society that no one discusses. We discuss every other kind of bigotry there is. Racism, anti-traveller bigotry, sexism. No one ever discusses classism. And so there is a huge difference, I think, between some college student called Finbar getting beaten by the Gardaí and his middle-class parents objecting, and somebody who might have a drug problem. I'm not saying this individual does, by the way, at all, but I'm saying somebody who comes from communities where drug problems are speaks with a very thick Dublin working class accent and protests migrants and might be unemployed. The attitudes in Middle Ireland, which sets opinions in this country towards those two individuals getting beaten up by the Gardaí, are entirely different, because there is classism in Irish society, and there is a sort of perverse joy in seeing the Gurriers getting the crap kicked out of them by the cops. That is just the society that we live in.
But the Garda Síochána must be more professional than that.
Oh yeah.
I mean, and don't get me wrong. I don't know what it's like to be on the front line and be a guard, and I wouldn't do the job for all the money in the world, right? When people are throwing stuff at them or whatever it is, or intimidating them, and you do have to fight fire with fire sometimes, and I get that. But some of the videos I've seen are just outrageous. They're just. I don't believe there's a need for that type of policing. I mean, and I put it down to Drew Harris, because obviously he has instructed that is the type of policing that's to be done. And we're seeing that in the protests, and that type of, when you have a situation where you have a protest of people who, there's a little bit of unrest, and the one single incident will spark the whole thing off, and you've got 30 or 40 guards there, that's fine, they're keeping the peace, they're telling everyone to stay back and, keep the road clear, whatever it is. And then all of a sudden, 10 vans arrive, with, the riot squad. I mean, that then becomes more intimidating, and they're standing there with the shields and the batons drawn. You're saying to yourself, this is going to start trouble.
Well, there's two things to it. I mean, first of all, that latter point I think you made is a good one, which is that eventually, as these protests metasize and grow, the Gardaí are taking the risk that organised groups are going to emerge who feel that they can go toe to toe with the riot squad, which would be a disaster for all concerned. The second point, though, is in relation to what I was saying. I wasn't endorsing the view that the Gardaí should be able to beat people up. I thought the particular footage that you saw, that I also saw, I mean, I'd add a couple of caveats, which is, as you said, we don't know what happened beforehand. We're seeing a particular.
Well, I think it's irrelevant, John, what happened beforehand, because at that particular moment he wasn't resisting clearly. So it was, no matter what he did beforehand, he deserves to be charged. Indeed, if he threw a missile or if he was behaving in a violent manner, he deserves to have under the Public Order Act to be arrested, handcuffs, and taken away. But I don't believe he deserves what happened.
Yeah, well, I would be advising that individual to strongly consider making complaint to GSOC, the Garda Síochána Ombudsman Commission, about that conduct. I think it's certainly worthy of investigation. I
mean, you had also three councillors there. I know Malachy Steens was there, Gavin Pepper, and I know these guys have been at all the protests. And I did see a video where they were appealing to the guards that they would try and assist to de-escalate the situation. They were pepper sprayed in the face. And they identified themselves, and I'm pretty sure the guards knew who they were, but they pepper sprayed them in the face. I mean,
yeah, and I think this is part of a concerning pattern, because obviously listeners who may be aware, may not be aware, that my colleague Fatima Gunning was pepper sprayed
That's right, in Newtown Mount Kennedy,
in similar circumstances in Newtown Mount Kennedy.
And she again identified herself as the press.
Identified herself as the press and was pepper sprayed anyway. And I do think there is a pattern here with, there are strong regulations in Garda Síochána around the use of pepper spray. Somebody must be actively disobeying Garda orders. They must be an active threat. That's
not what's happening right now. They're just indiscriminately spraying it. 78-year-old man yesterday and an old woman.
Neither you nor I are in a position to be judge, jury, and executioner on this, in fairness to the Gardaí involved. But that said, I think there's a case to answer there. I think it's very clear that at least in some circumstances, there are legitimate questions to be asked about whether the Gardaí are exceeding the limits of their operational authority in the deployment of pepper spray, and indeed in the violence they're using against protesters. And by the way, this is you and me speaking about it, what we see in sort of reasoned, measured tones. There are a lot of people out there seeing that footage who don't feel any obligation to speak about it in reasoned or measured tones. And the result of that is that you're creating more antagonism between the Garda Síochána and the communities they're supposed to be policing. And the Garda Síochána are being put into this position by a government that is determined to ram hugely unpopular policy down the throats of communities who want nothing to do with it. And then the communities are being blamed for being the ones who are damaging the relationship between between the communities and the state. This is active government policy. So, I mean, you and I can sit here and talk about it in measured tones all we want, but the people who can put a stop to this are those sitting in government buildings who are making the decisions, who are drawing little circles around maps and saying, we're going to put 1,000 people into this community.
But would that be the logical thing to do? Because the root of the problem here, is obviously, cut off snake's tail. But the root of the problem here is that you, or the head of the snake, the head of the snake is the decisions, the policy to be made by the government. The root of the problem is you have a government minister who should turn around and say to these communities, not, villainise them. Yes, you can villainise people who cause trouble, and everybody should condemn those who throw missiles or who act the fool or act like thugs, right, or burn things and all those kind of things, right? But you turn around and you say, right, we're going to pause everything for 3 days. Let's all gather our thoughts. There'll be no more construction. There'll be guaranteed there'll be no more JCBs, no more beds. 3 or 4 days is not going to matter. We'll sit down, we'll talk to you. We'll ask you what you want. We'll tell you what we want. Can we come to an agreement together? Decide on who your spokesperson is or your spokespeople are. If it's to be Malachy Steenson and Gavin Pepper and a few other people who are councillors from Finglas or from the area or whatever, right? Let's all decide, and pick a spokesperson. And we will sit down with the Department of Integration and talk about it. But that's just not happening. It's like we're just ramming it in there. So the government have to they're not doing it, but they must take responsibility for creating this division and this problem.
Well, that's my opinion as well as yours. And I mean, it's very clear to me that the government's approach has been, and you need to look at the map, to put these centres into areas where they feel that it's not going to particularly damage them electorally as much. I mean, I was struck yesterday that the councillors interviewed representing the area, neither Gavin Pepper nor Malachy Steenson, nor the other councillor involved, the lad from the National Party whose name I can't remember, none of them represent that area. The councillors who do represent that area are, a former People Before Profit guy who's now independent, a Sinn Féin councillor, and I think another left winger. So it's a very left wing area. So the government aren't getting a load of votes out of there anyway. And I really think there's a very cynical approach in government to put these centres into places where it's going to do more damage to the Sinn Féin vote than it is to do with them. I think it's one of the most deeply cynical things any government has ever done, because people keep making the point. You don't see these centres in Stillorgan, you don't see them in the nice
Ballsbridge or Foxrock or Dalkey or Killiney or
they tend to either go into deprived villages in the Midlands or working class parts.
Well, see, the government's argument on that, John, is it's more expensive to procure a warehouse in the middle of Ballsbridge or Dalkey or Killiney. But I don't believe that's the real reason. I think we all know that's not the real reason. But that never
seems to work the other way, though, does it? It never seems to work the other way. They never say, well, it's actually much cheaper to put a new hospital into Coolock.
Yeah.
They never say it's actually much cheaper to invest in services in Drimna. They don't do that.
I think Councillor Glenn Moore, by the way, was the councillor you were talking about.
No, it wasn't Glenn Moore. It was the lad from the National Party. And again, I genuinely can't remember his name.
Okay.
But Glenn Moore is the Irish Freedom Party guy, but it wasn't him. But so the cost argument only tends to work one way.
One way around,
That is
okay.
And by the way, that councillor from the National Party, and again, I apologise, I genuinely, his name, I don't want to use the wrong name, it's gone out of my head, but he was speaking and addressing the Gardaí. Now, he was making a very political speech.
But he turned his back and he walked, and then they started pushing him with the shields. And he wasn't resisting. He wasn't being violent. He wasn't. He made his point to the guards, quite an impassionate plea, actually, for it all to end. And he turned his back and was walking away peacefully. And they came at him then and started pushing him with the shield. Now, ultimately, the guard fell over, which went down quite well with the crowd in the end. But in saying that, that's not the type of policing I'm used to seeing in Ireland, nor do I want to see it. And I said it's reminiscent of the May Day riots back in the day when we all condemned that at the time. And I'd like to see Ireland being the kind of country that we can still say, look, we can protest. Yes, there can be a level of civil disobedience that will be dealt with by the guards in a measured manner, but not in the manner that we've seen over the last 2 days, or certainly in Newtown.
The other element here, Niall, not to be too self-congratulatory for you and me, but the other element here, which is massive, is the media. Because you and I are discussing this stuff, and it's stuff everyone can see. And we're not minimising. We're not saying, nobody did anything wrong with the protest. Clearly, there were things thrown at Gardaí. There were vehicles set on fire. But we are the only people in the media, it seems to me, you and the outlet I run, who are discussing the other side of this, who are discussing, what clearly seems to us, I think, to be the excessive use of Garda force, which clearly seems to be bad communication on behalf of the state, which clearly seems to be the targeting of working class areas instead of other areas for the imposition of these centres. And yet you've got the Irish Times and you've got the RTE and you've got the Irish Independent running stories like how the far right whipped up fear in Coolock, which is a headline in the Irish Times today. So, I mean, some of the propaganda and the propagandizing from people who are supposed to, because they are journalists, hold the government to account is just astonishing. And so many of these people in the media, these weasels, seem to think it's their job to hold the people to account on behalf of the state rather than the other way around. And while that happens, it's very hard to have an open and mature discussion of what's happening in this society, because it pushes people into silos. And it means that people who are perhaps more sympathetic with the protesters feel constantly attacked and are therefore less willing to have a reasonable discussion with the other side. This kind of media bias poisons the entire debate. And it's a huge problem.
Yeah, no, it is a huge problem. But look, we'll continue to fight the fight. When I say the fight for honesty and impartiality when we talk about these things. John McGurk from Grip Media, listen, thank you very much indeed. And we will continue to talk. I'm sure this is probably going to go on a little bit longer than we expected. Thank you, John. I appreciate you coming on the air today. We want to take your calls as well. Don't forget, by the way, 085 122 55. That's 085 122 55. Let me go to Morris. He's been waiting ages. I do apologise, Morris. I got engrossed in that conversation. No, and it's an interesting conversation to be able to have a measured conversation, and yes, condemn those who misbehave. But you know, why are people misbehaving? Why is there a protest going on? And why aren't the government engaging when they say they're engaging, which they're not really? They're just telling the people what they're doing, and they don't really have a choice in it. That's not really engaging, is it?
No, they should be inclusive. Them people have lived there all their lives in that area. You shouldn't be having situations like this being imposed on them. By the government, you know, I think it's way out of order. And I've seen that incident you talk about, and it horrified me. Because when I was in the army, we done shield training and baton training for getting crowds under control, you know, and we were loved. Like, we were trained by really good soldiers, right? And there was another group of soldiers with bricks and bottles down the end of the barracks, and they bombarded us. And we had to stay steady and hold your...
Yeah, I mean, look. When you're riot police or you're police and you're at a situation where there's a protest, you are trained to expect civil disobedience. You have to expect civil disobedience, and you have to be trained to deal with that in a certain manner. Because unfortunately, you know, tempers flare, tensions rise. Now, I'm only referring to that one because I've seen a few videos, but that one particular video, John is familiar with that as well. I don't know what the guy. Yeah, I don't know what the guy did before that video. Maybe he did nothing. I don't know. Okay, we're not going to speculate on what he did. Some people have suggested he was only on his way home from work. I don't know. Maybe he threw a missile. Maybe he did something. I don't know what he did, right? Or if he did anything at all. But the point is, no matter what he did or didn't do, he didn't deserve to be treated like that. He wasn't resisting arrest. They grabbed him by the legs and. It was like some sort of wrestling match, the way they pinned him to the ground.
Yeah, exactly.
Then they
on the ground.
knelt on him, stood on him. Then that guard come over with his long nightstick and start beating him with it. And I'm going, why are you hitting him? He's not doing anything. You know what I mean? So that's a wooden baton he has now. That's not a nightstick. That's a wooden baton. And then that guard walked off. They clearly had him restrained at that stage. 3 of them on top of him. The guard walks off and decides, sure, I'll go back and give him another hiding with it just for the crack. And goes back over and gives him another hiding with it. And I'm going, why are they doing that?
He was hitting him in the face while he was thrown in against the wall. And I'll tell you what, the guard that was trying to get the handcuffs on him and was roughing him up, the fellow that was kneeling on him, it reminded me of George Floyd. With the knee on the head.
Well, I tell you what, that type of policing is unacceptable policing, right? I mean, I understand police have to fight fire with fire, and I get that. When you're in, and it's difficult. If you're in a volatile situation, it can be difficult sometimes to make the right decision. But this was an isolated situation. Now, there was another situation where somebody mentioned, of course, the councillor, Quinlan, I think was his name. Patrick Quinlan.
Yes.
And Patrick Quinlan was there. He gave, whether you agree with him or not, he gave an impassionate view of the situation. He then turned his back to walk away peacefully, and they charged him and started pushing him with the shield.
Yeah.
That's unnecessary. Yeah. That's not the style of policing that we're used to in this country. Wait till he walks away.
Intimidation.
Yeah, I mean, that's not how you do
intimidation.
It. You know what I mean?
Yeah. What I'd say to you, Niall, is, though, those 2 guards that brutalised that young man in the grey tracksuit up against the wall, I saw the first fella that was running towards him. He dropped his shield and ran after him. And that was the fella that whipped his legs under the ground, right?
Yeah.
And then your man came in and laid into him with the baton, the wooden bat. Those 2 officers should be charged for overreaction and assault. I come from an army background, and when people lose the plot, they lost the plot. And especially the fella swinging the baton. He was all over the place. And then he started ramming the baton in between the wall and his head, punching him in the head with the stick. It was vicious. Now, listen, there's an awful lot of bad behaviour going on out there, and I know there's good people in Coolock, and everybody's going, oh, it's a drug-ravaged area, the drug dealers and the dealers are taking over. They're in every area. The whole of society is gone. Well, if the decent people at Coolock and the north side of Dublin, there was a reporter outside that building yesterday who flew in from Canada for 2 days to report.
I saw that
us.
from Rebel News,
Said, yeah. And he said, not only am I coming here, I've heard about a village down the country whose population is 165, and they're bringing in
John mentioned
500 men.
John mentioned that.
Yeah.
Well, I think the biggest problem is that, as they said, we don't have a veto on it. In other words, as John mentioned, any other opportunity that they would have to build anything anywhere, you would have to get planning permission and people can put up objections. But when it comes to asylum seekers or accommodation centres, there is a waiver.
What's the name of the guy you know, Niall? Niall, what's the name of the guy you know on Tua? The politician. He's the only member of the party on Tua.
Who's that now? I'm lost.
Yeah, you have an independent guy. He comes on your show a lot. He's on the show a lot. He's the only independent.
His name's got out of my head. Yeah, I know the from the Dublin Renters Union. Yes.
Yes, and the guy. The politician that ran for Europe, and now he's he didn't get through in the west of Ireland. Hey man, he used to be ex-Sinn Féin. Now he's on Tua. He's in that party on Tua in the Dáil. Anyway,
yeah.
He said he was getting text messages off guards to say, I'm getting WhatsApped into the fucking public order group. They're telling me if to go now and work in the public order group. You don't just draft people in and give them a baton and a shield and say, get out there and knock the shit out of them. You have to be trained up for that. Okay, they're getting called in. You're now in the public order unit.
Okay, well, listen, unfortunately, I'm running out of time rapidly here. We've so many people want to come on today. I'm only going to have to give everybody 2 or 3 minutes. But Maurice, bottom line is, this is not going to end, sadly. It will probably happen again today. And I would appeal to the people, by the way, of Coolock and the people of the protest. Please protest if you want to, but do it peacefully. I don't want to see people getting hurt no more than I want to see members of Garda Síochána getting hurt. I don't want to see anybody getting hurt. But the answer truly lies here with the government to engage with people, doesn't it?
Pretty much so. Thanks, Niall.
All right, thank you very much indeed. Right, let me go to Malachy. Hi, Malachy. Unfortunately, Malachy, I have to be very quick with everybody because I have another 13 people want to come on. I've only got a half an hour to do it in. So, Malachy, I saw you the other day in a video trying to engage with the Gardaí to tell them that you would try and de-escalate the situation, and you were pepper sprayed in the face.
Yes, there was 4 of us, 4 councillors, myself, Gavin Pepper, Glenn Moore, and Patrick Quinlan, went up to the police lines. And very clear, we're very clearly identifiable. The police knew exactly who we were. The inspector knew who we were. And they raised and there was another 2 young lads, one of my son and my nephew were with us. They raised the pepper spray, and we were very clearly saying we were elected councillors and we wanted to speak to them to try and de-escalate what was happening. Just as I have done in Ballymun early last year. And in other instances, there have been no violence at any of the protests or rallies that we have had, except the violence that was either tried to be initiated by the police in O'Connell Street in February, as they kettled our rally down O'Connell Street to create a confrontation with the loons from the left. Now, we said we wanted to talk to them about de-escalating it because it was a very serious situation.
And Malachy, I'm assuming, and I would like to think you would condemn people who try to set fire to Garda cars or throw missiles. You condemn that behaviour, don't you?
I'm not getting into the politics.
No, Malachy, no, Malachy. If we're going to have a measured conversation, right? You have to condemn bad behaviour on both sides. On both sides.
I'll condemn. Hold on, Niall. For 30 years of a conflict in the north, we had a politics of condemnation, and it got us nowhere. Other than people saying they condemn things when they really didn't give a damn about them. And it's just to feed into the state narrative.
No, Malachy, it doesn't feed into anything. I'm happy to condemn bad behaviour. Now, hang on. I'm happy to condemn bad behaviour by Garda Síochána, and I have condemned the bad behaviour, and I have condemned what I believe is policing, which is unacceptable, right, to some degree, right? But I'm also willing to condemn people who take it upon themselves to set fire to a JCB, to set fire to mattresses, or anything like that.
Hold on, no. I'm neither going to condemn nor condone it. But let's look at what actually happened. The fires were at 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning. There was a protest called, and I said it on your programme that day, that there was a protest being organised for 6 o'clock that night. There was no violence at that until the riot squad had started using CS gas or pepper spray on people. That's what kicked off the violence. There was absolutely no need for the riot police in heavy armour to be on the scene. They could have been in the vans like they have been at other times, but they were there purely to provoke. And this is not like going into Ballsbridge. There is a huge problem in most working class areas between the interaction between the Gardaí and young youths. And that can kick off at any time over any issue. So they can talk about community policing and all of they've undone years' work of community policing in every working class community by these type of tactics. Now, Drew Harris, particularly as the officer in charge of the police who are on the ground, is sending young guards, and and I'm not being in any way sexist about this, but the amount of young women guards who are put on the front line on Monday by Drew Harris is a disgrace.
Well, it would be the superintendent. It wouldn't be Drew Harris in particular. He just gave the order.
Drew Harris is the man in charge. He's the one who decides what happens, right? Not the cops on the ground. They're told what to do. And to put people in that position, and then to put the riot squad behind them, this was the
okay, Malachy, I very little time. How do we come to a conclusion? I mean, as far as I can see, the only conclusion is that the government call for calm, say they're not going to do anything for the next 7 days, and then and when I say negotiate, I don't mean just tell people it's happening whether you like it or not. I mean actually negotiate with elected spokespersons.
No, John said out there quite clearly what happens in every other change of a building or a planning development or anything. The state has changed the law to allow them to do what they want to do. Now, the only answer to this, Niall, is that the government announces that this facility is not going ahead. That's the only answer. The people have spoken. And you have, they couldn't find anybody in Coolock yesterday to say that they wanted it there. They ended up finding some guy from some partnership who's probably on a very heavy salary saying, we need to engage with the youths. That's what they were supposed to be doing already. This is one of the most disadvantaged areas in the country. And it's taken the likes of GB News and Rebel News from Canada to come in and actually publicise this around the world.
I know, I was actually on GB News yesterday. It got more coverage on GB News than it did on RTE. And to be honest with you, impartial coverage.
It's not surprising, that the coverage it got. Because there are no journalists in RTE or in any of the mainstream media at this time. They're just political mouthpieces waiting to
there are journalists, but they're just going to go there and say that everybody was behaving badly.
Niall, let's look what a journalist is. A journalist is somebody who sees what's happening and reports the facts. He doesn't interpret them. He reports them. Journalist, reporter, it's the same thing. What we have in this country look at today's, the front of two of the tabloids, plot to kill Varadkar. I could have told you last week that would be the next thing coming, because this is all about bringing in the hate speech laws. It's about bringing in more repressive legislation against people and denying the right to protest. Look at the snarling face of Simon Harris yesterday, telling people that there was consultation. Consultation, Niall, is not going and using your NGOs and your woke liberals to tell people what is happening.
Okay, no, and I agree. Consultation is not telling people something is happening whether you like it or not. That's it. Shut up. I get that. Malachy, thank you very much indeed. I'm sorry I have to be really quick with everybody, so I'm now going to have to reduce it to a minute and a half, I've been told. Sorry, Joe, I do apologise. Go ahead, Joe.
Thanks, Niall.
Hi, Niall. How are you doing? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Joe. Just your opinion on what's happening there in Coolock, but not just in Coolock, in other parts of the country over the last 18 months when we've seen so many protests and yet nothing actually happening.
Well, unfortunately, and I agree there with what Malachy says, and I agree with what's been said over the last couple of days. If anyone is to blame for this, it's the government. The government have caused this problem, and they have lumbered communities in against one another to kind of take the law into their own hands. And unfortunately, you have a situation now where people are turning against one another. And as you say there, you have the certain media in this country who don't seem to give two fiddlers about the communities. Now, what I saw the other day with the Gardaí was actually disgraceful. Like, there was an incident where an elderly man,
78-year-old grandfather, I saw.
Yeah, was pepper sprayed, and that was an absolute disgrace. That's brutality at the highest degree. Like, no elderly person or anybody who's not doing any trouble should be ever forced through that kind of thing,
Well, I believe there was an 11-year-old pepper sprayed. Mind you, I don't know what an 11-year-old was doing in the middle of all that, to be honest with you.
Yeah, well, I don't think it should. Yeah, exactly. I don't know what a child
I would advise people not to be bringing children to these types of protests.
Yeah. Yeah,
I understand that's not the way it starts. I understand it starts off as a peaceful protest. You think it's okay to have the kids and the prams and everything there with you. A lot of these would be young mothers and stuff like that. But please, if you do have children, avoid these kind of situations, because that's what ends up.
And it's and the way it's turning out now, Niall, it's divide and conquer. Really, it's the state versus the ordinary people. That's what's happening, and it's kind of ironic how you have all these politicians like coming down hard and heavy now on people. Now, I do agree that there were a few people there who probably shouldn't have been there at the protests. But that always will happen, Niall, when you have large gatherings anyway.
No, I don't know why Malachy just can't condemn that, but I'll condemn it. There are individuals who are thugs.
Oh, yeah.
There are individuals who are there who are not there for the protest, who are there just to start trouble. And that happens at many protests, unfortunately.
Yeah, I've seen that myself over the years. I've seen it at events where you'll have Jono, the headbanger, come along, going to cause major hassle. Yeah. But look, that's the way it is, and unfortunately,
like I seen one video where there was a group of young fellas, and all they were doing were smashing up 2 Garda cars.
Yeah,
they don't care about immigrants or about accommodation centres or anything. They just want to do damage.
They just want to do mayhem. Yeah, exactly. And of course, there's no place in society for that. No. But unfortunately, blaming everybody for this, like blaming ordinary people for this thing, is not working. And until the government get their act together and start coming clean with the people, then you'll have something, some sort of change happening. But unfortunately, while these clowns are there, and as I said to your researcher a while ago, it's the Irish, it's the people who keep voting these parties in are the people who are the problem. While you keep voting in this kind of rubbish, you're going to get this kind of rubbish.
Unfortunately, Joe, and I agree with you, there isn't much of an alternative. Thank you very much indeed, Joe. Let me go to Gladys, and I'm going to come to Bernie and Karen. Gladys, hi, and I'm sorry for rushing everybody. I do apologise. Yeah. Go ahead, Gladys. Make your point.
Yeah, hi, Niall. Look, I just believe that, what John said about classism, I think is absolutely... the government, promote one another for causing this absolute huge problem. And those people in Coolock have been there for months. So this didn't happen just over the last couple of days. They've been saying no for months.
Yeah.
And obviously nobody gives a damn or listens. And I absolutely believe that this is a class divide, and you name it. And as you said, the likes of Culok and Fox Rock, this would not be happening.
No.
They wouldn't be allowing it to happen. And I feel now that, the idea that all of these people coming in, we all know, everybody knows, the dog in the street knows, sort of saying a lot of them, we don't know what the hell is happening, why they're here, and on the canals and on boats, and our children, our daughters, afraid to walk the roads. I'm not saying they're doing anything, but who do we know? Do we know that they're doing anything? This has to stop. Honestly, my country is turning into, some sort of horrible, horrible place. And I do feel in the violence, and there was people, I watched it, and, agitators on both sides,
Yep.
I felt sorry for the young, as the guy said, the young girls, young guard on the front and the big guys behind with the shields and you name it. What is going on? In a deprived area, to move in 500 plus men in Coolock is absolute madness. Honestly, the decision makers, the ones in government, the ones that will not have this problem on their doorstep, need to leave. And you said, look,
their answer to it today, by the way, is that they will be, and according to Helen McEntee, they will not be deterred by this violence. They also said the government is currently looking at more than 30 large buildings for use for accommodation for migrants, because obviously the numbers have risen 93.9% since this time last year. They will continue to rise, probably. And as you rightly said, I don't see them procuring any buildings in Blackrock or Killiney or across from Bono's house.
Niall, sorry to interrupt. Can I just say, this absolutely feeds into this narrative of the far right. This suits the government down to the ground. This is,
I think John made a really good point, and the point is, but when I was on the campaign, I noticed it too, that the government are looking at areas like Coolock, for example. They know Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, they're not going to get many votes there anyway.
Yeah.
They get their votes out in Dunleary and Sallynoggin and places like that. So that's where they care about. So, to upset people out in a community like Coolock is not going to be too bad for the election for them.
No, and I absolutely 100% agree with them. And the frustration then for people that see what's happening, sort of thing and again, thank you and your programme and Grip News for the only outlets that allow the ordinary people, citizens who are decent people, that's what we are. We're mostly decent, and whatever, have nowhere to go to. No one wants to listen to us, Like, honestly, they don't even come to your door. They run away. They don't want to listen, and you name it. And it feels that literally, day by day, our rights are being eroded,
Okay, but sorry, Gladys, for cutting you short, but thank you very much, Need, and a very well made point. Let me go to Bernie as well. Bernie, go ahead, Bernie.
Hi, Niall. My point is just that building was idle for so many years, and they keep calling Culok a deprived area. That's not fair. Why didn't they get more employment in there?
But there was a suggestion going back, I think, 8-9 years ago, when the building finally became completely derelict, which was 2016, I think. There was a suggestion at the time. Now, it had been closed long before that, by the way, and there had been very few staff left in the place since the late 1990s. But there was a suggestion that the area, because there's a lot of other factories like that, it's a really old industrial estate. There's a lot of newer industrial estates now around the area, which most of the companies have gone to, that they repurpose the land and they rezone it and build social housing on it. But that never materialised.
Yeah, but Niall, it's not right. I mean, you've got the likes of Bagot Street Hospital idling there. The reason that's not touched is it because it's beside Morehampton Road or Haddington Road? Is the Saks Hotel on the same side? That's not touched either. Like, they're ideal places. They already have bedrooms. They already have bathrooms. Why aren't they used?
Because they're in areas where government gets votes. That's why.
But that's not right. I mean, the whole thing I'm living down here in a community where we have buildings, and we're all freaked out these last couple of weeks because we've approached our government. All we hear is there's going to be asylum seekers. They're going to put in tents. It's rumoured at the moment, and we've asked the government what they're going to do with these. Nobody will talk to us.
I mean, you heard Helen McAtee this morning saying these protests will not deter her from continuing with these plans.
Well, she should be sacked.
I know your dad was a police officer or a member of Gardaí on the day. I'm sure he wouldn't be very proud of what's going on at the moment.
No, absolutely not. I know in my heart, I have his genes, so I know he wouldn't. But I mean, she should be walked out of the job. She's not doing the job. She's not representing me as a person of this country. She's not representing anybody in any community. She's only representing the government's right cheek. And she doesn't care about us who have put them in power. They should be taken out. She should be sacked. I'm sorry, she's not doing the job to my what I think is the standard.
Yeah, just to clarify, when you said taken out of power, obviously, yeah.
Yeah. Obviously, sorry.
Yeah. No. It's because some arsehole will come along and say, "Oh, you let somebody say that in your show." So, and just with the temperature of the moment.
I'll clarify that.
No. It's not. It's not your fault. It's just the way people interpret things nowadays. But she should, and Rodrigo Gorman and the rest of them, as far as I'm concerned, don't need to be in those jobs.
Us.
No, they're not representing because they're not listening. They're not listening. Is the problem?
No. You'd sack somebody from another job if they weren't doing their job in an ordinary real world like we are in. You'd be sacked if you didn't perform, and they're not. They're continuously ignoring us. It's like as if we're shit on their shoes, and we're not. We're the people. We are the public. We are the country they're meant to represent, and they're not doing it.
All right, thank you very much indeed, Bernie. Let me go to Karen as well. Karen, hi, how are you?
Hi, Niall. I think it's disgraceful what's happening. Again, I would echo the same comments as everybody else. This never happens in posh Dub. It's always working class areas that get dumped with these migrants and all these migrant centres. It's never the posh areas. And again, like you say, because the votes don't matter in these working class areas, they're all left wing or whatever you want to call them. But it's disgraceful behaviour. I mean, I saw one there, a terminally ill woman with crutches.
I saw her,
being pepper sprayed there. I mean, that woman posed no threat whatsoever to anybody.
Seemingly she was sitting at a bus stop when it happened, yeah.
That was it, I saw it. Absolutely disgraceful. Pepper spraying kids. An elderly gentleman there, a 70-year-old man, said he was out to defend his grandchildren. Pepper spraying that man, knowing that man was no threat to anybody else. I saw him out then spraying other people out, and I saw caption then of literally laughing at them. Mocking the people. Literally mocking the people. And Helen McEntee doesn't give a damn about it. But yet, no problem, by the way. You go back almost 4 years ago, and you go back to 2020 in America, and George Floyd, and a criminal And then, what was it? I can't breathe. Well, what about then that young fella last night that couldn't breathe with their knee on his neck? And Helen McEnany, I've seen so much footage of armed military in the US attacking peaceful protesters. It's upsetting, it's infuriating, it's hard to watch, but people need to see what's happening. Well, hello, Helen, Minister McEnany. People need to see exactly what's happening in Coolock right now, under your watch as Minister for Justice. And the thuggish behaviour from the Gardaí. There are Gardaí, by the way, I have full respect for the Gardaí. And there are probably elements in the Gardaí that are bad apples. And when you look at the protesters, well, there's probably a few of them out there just agitators causing trouble. But that does not represent what the people of Coolock are. And these are people just want to defend their community. I can tell you now, for everybody looking and thinking, they're nothing on a bunch of thugs. Guess what? This is coming to a town near you and a village near you. Like Dundrum, 165 people. Now they intend to move in, just under 300 people. The demographics changed in 24 hours once that happens. Roscrea is another town. Roscrea is destroyed. Women. I have heard first-hand accounts of women in Roscrea of speaking of their experiences, and they no longer feel safe anymore. They don't go out walking in the evenings anymore. They keep to themselves. They're afraid. There are men going around groping them the whole time, and nobody gives a damn. And it's only going to get worse. There's no there's now earmarked again for more asylum seekers. They're not even asylum seekers, they're scammers.
Well, a lot of them are economic migrants. Yeah, some of the genuine, but a lot of them are economic migrants.
Men coming into our country. They're not fleeing persecution. They're coming in and they're terrorising towns and villages. And it's coming to you, by the way, wherever you live right now and you're listening, it's coming to your town and it's coming to your village.
Just finally, in relation to Helen McEnany and her decisions and the government saying that they have communicated, they said that Culok and the people of Culok are wrong, and that they have tried to, talk to the locals in the area, the community in the area. I don't think they have. I think what they've said is they've just told them what's happening. They just told them what's happening.
Exactly. What we mean by speak to the locals, just say, okay, guys, we're moving in X in here, we're moving in X in here. That's it. You got to put up with it. And if you don't, then submit. If you don't, then all of a sudden we're going to send in the right squad. And as Maliki stated earlier on, there was no need to send in the right squad. They send it in to stir up.
Yeah, I think on many occasions it's probably unnecessary and probably creates a bigger problem. But I do believe, and I do have to be fair as well, because look, the show is about being fair and everybody having their opinions. I do have to be fair. There are individuals, at those, and I've looked at some of the other videos too. As I mentioned earlier on, there was a group of about 5 or 6 thugs, is all I could call them. Smashing the windows of the Garda cars, trying to set the Garda car on fire.
That serves no purpose whatsoever. Just like in last November, when you had that migrant as well that stabbed all the children in Dublin outside the school. And all of a sudden then you had thugs literally using that as an opportunity to go out then and burn Garda cars and everything else. And again, all it does, and it's great footage, and it's just ammunition for the mainstream media then to demonise people. That's all it is. And that shouldn't have, and those people need to be...
Yeah, and they need to, anybody who does that kind of behaviour or acts in that manner should be arrested and charged. Yeah. So your phone is breaking up there, Karen, a bit. Sorry. Your phone is breaking up a little bit.
Sorry.
Go ahead. Finally, just what you want to say.
No, I don't support these thugs whatsoever. I don't, however, that does not say that is what this protest is about. These are regular people who want to defend their communities.
Okay, listen, thank you for that. I'm going to come to Maureen in a second. Some of the messages I got in. Now, I don't know much about Malachy Steenson, but I've just lost all respect for him because of his failure to condemn troublemakers. 2 wrongs never make a right. I'm very glad that you pushed him to condemn it, and did yourself. The situation is very complicated, but bad communication is at the root. The government needs to start treating citizens like adults and learn from the mistakes. Definition of madness, doing the same thing repeatedly and expecting a different result. I really don't know what I'll do if the situation arose where I live. There are no easy answers, but we have to listen to each other and respect each other. It's our only hope. Both sides have been guilty of disrespect. That comes in from Galway Girl. Let me go to Maureen. Maureen, hi, how are you?
Hi, Niall, how are you?
Good, Maureen. I mean, Maureen, look, Galway Girl is right. When you see bad behaviour, you must condemn it. Because if we don't condemn bad behaviour, how do we expect others to condemn bad behaviour by the government when they're not making good decisions either? So we must all talk about things rationally and condemn bad and condone good behaviour.
But that's the problem, Niall. Nothing is being spoken about rationally. Because I don't call them a government, I call them traitors. And they're the worst shower that have sat in there since 1922. They have no respect for the Irish people whatsoever. And this was all written in George Soros's manifesto in 2015, and Viktor Orban read it out in the EU Parliament. Hence, Viktor Orban has lost his presidency. They got him out of that. This goes a lot deeper than what we are being told. And as the other lady said with the Karen, this is going to come to every town and village, and even where I'm in West Cork, because there's going to be so many of them coming in here. They're going to be looking for it. They can't fit them all in the cities and just near the cities.
Okay, so let me put a government hat on for a second. Not that I would agree with the argument, but I'm just going to put it on and give you the argument. If every town and city that they try to move immigrants into says, no, you can't put them in here, where are they going to put them? That's the government's argument.
I don't care where they put them. They can take them to the nearest ferry port at the airport and get rid of the whole lot of them and deport them. Because they're nothing now but a drain on society. Who's going to employ them?
Hold on. But not every migrant that comes into the country is a drain on society. That's an incorrect statement.
The ones that are coming in here, that are crossing 7 and 8 countries, are a drain on this society.
I agree with you. There has to be a fair immigration policy, and those who are not genuine asylum seekers, who are not fleeing a war, should not be allowed entry into the country. Well, Niall, we should decide who they are, and they should be deported. I agree with that.
I tell you, we can count the number of genuine asylum seekers on our 10 fingers. These fellas are coming across 7 and 8 countries. They're getting on aircraft. They're getting on ferries. Where's the money coming from? I saw a video of them. They landed on a Spanish beach. All these NGOs were there, handing them new phones in boxes. And they were taking the phones out of the boxes, as opposed to giving their orders. People have no idea how deep this has gone. Like, there's something a lot more sinister behind all this.
All right, well, listen, thank you for that, Maureen. Sorry, I'm rushed to go through a lot of people at the moment. I've got to go to Suzanne next. Suzanne, hi, how are you?
Hi, Niall. Great show, Niall. I really enjoyed listening to yourself and John. Listen, people have made all the points, but I suppose I just want to reiterate that the average person doesn't want male, unvetted asylum seekers in the community. So we're all for proper immigration and asylum seeking. And I know we've spoken about this before, but I'm just making that point. And ramming them into communities is actually... It's painful. It's actually painful. And I just want to say, Niall, I drove up to Coolock last night. Just one point, Niall, I saw something this morning somewhere that said the Deer Park Hotel in Howth is earmarked. I'm not sure whether that's correct or not, but I'm going to keep an eye on it. But Niall, I drove up to Coolock last night at 8:30 before the police had arrived, and I drove through, and all I saw were people standing on the roads looking shocked, and I didn't get a vibe where I feel unsafe here. I just thought the shock on people's faces. I think a lot of people in Coolock are in shock. And I think vilifying the whole of Coolock as some gang of thugs, I totally condemn any violence. But when I was driving up the Malahide Road into Coolock, there's a multitude of different communities under the Coolock umbrella, and all I could see was people standing around in the street, fear on their faces, shock, and my heart went out to them. And then as I drove further up the Malahide Road last night, all I could see was the Gardaí descending from every corner. And that's when I started to feel fearful. I was like, oh my God, they were coming from every corner. And that's the sort of thing. So I'm just saying, Niall...
I mean, like in every protest, although this one was particularly bad, like in every protest, there is always going to be an element. And most people are genuinely concerned citizens, right? Just genuinely concerned. As somebody referred to them the other day as mams with prams. You got mothers, grandparents, fathers, genuinely have concerns about what's going on. They feel nobody's speaking to them. They feel nobody's listening to them, right? But you are always going to get an element, and unfortunately that element are the ones that always end up in the newspapers, who are going to throw missiles, who behave like thugs, who set fire to Garda cars, whatever it happens to be, and cause the problems. There's always, and I think, we have to condemn that as well, because if we're to have a fair conversation, and not for the government to turn around and say, oh, did you listen to that conversation? They won't even condemn the violence. We have to condemn it. The same way as I have to condemn what I believe is an overreaction by the police. And I believe that the Garda, in some instance, not in all, but in some instances, were completely heavy-handed. And it's not the type of policing I want to see in Ireland.
But I know there's loads of people now, but John made a very good point. All the narrative in the papers is against the thugs. And I want to make the point, there's a huge community in Coolock up there, and there's a small majority who probably did go against the rules. But now, when you were canvassing, we spent time up in Coolock on 3 occasions. The people of Coolock are just a lovely, warm community. Mm-hmm. We never had one person ever.
No.
The only time we had any bad time was down at the Crow Park when people were going into the match. Never once. My heart is with Coolock because of the canvassing we did, and people genuinely open-hearted. But I felt last night, I feel so incredibly sorry for them, and I know the thugs have given the whole campaign the bad name, and I think the papers have just picked on specific instances, but I think there were multiple other instances where the Gardaí were heavy-handed, and I think there's multiple other instances where people were up there So now the bottom line, you're trying to ram 500 unvetted male asylum seekers, not people genuinely claiming asylum or children or mothers or whatever. We're talking about the unvetted economic migrants, ramming them into a community. It's scandalous. They wouldn't be in the south side. And I'm going to keep an eye on Deer Park Hotel because I saw that somewhere this morning, and that could be interesting.
Okay, we'll try and find out about that. That may or may not be true. Suzanne, thank you very much indeed. I appreciate you coming on. Let me go to Tony, and I've got to go to Madeline and John. Tony, hi, how are you?
Niall, how are you doing? You okay?
Good. Tony, if we can all make it very quick, because I'm in big trouble here today now because I've gone way over time, but go on.
Right, fine. It is very quick, Niall. What I find very disturbing is a Garda who will beat a man that's on the ground, who will pepper spray a woman in the face, who will pepper spray an old age pensioner in the face. There's something wrong with that Garda. There's only a small minority of Garda who's capable of doing that. There was an incident in England, just like where there was a Wayne Cousins that went out and used his badge to lure a lady into his car and he raped her and murdered her.
Yeah.
I think these Garda need to be seriously investigated because it's not every Garda that's able to do that.
No, most guards, on the front line, they're in a difficult situation. They do the best they can. No. But there are guards who go completely over the top.
They're the sadistic ones, Niall, and they're the dangerous ones. Yeah. And I think they should be serious. Anyone.
But what I don't understand is, as I mentioned to John, and I was talking about John McGurk earlier on, you may not remember, Tony, the May Day riots back in 2003, I think it was.
I do, and there was RoboCop.
RoboCop.
Everyone,
but you remember how the guards at that time.
He was disciplined, wasn't he?
Yeah, but the guards. Well, he ended up on desk duty for a while, but I believe he's back. He's got a good job now. But maybe he's reformed or something. I don't know. But look, the bottom line is, at that time, the guards were called out for bad behaviour. It was fully investigated. There was sanctions against many guards made. People were compensated for the way the guards behaved against them. And yet,
but the difference.
And yet, what I've seen is a similar situation. What?
The difference is we hadn't got Drew Hardis at the helm.
No, I see a new style of policing, is what I'm saying. That seems to be acceptable, and I don't find some of what I've seen, not all of what I've seen. Obviously, they have to deal with the situation, fight fire with fire sometimes. But some of what I've seen is not acceptable policing.
Hold on, Niall. I've spoken to many a Garda over the years. I've been involved in football. That is not the Irish Garda. It's not the Irish Garda to go out and strike women and things like that. They don't hit women as a rule. These Garda are going to beat women.
Well, they're hitting anybody who gets in their way. Yeah, it's quite indiscriminate, is what it is. And I mentioned yesterday about that gentleman Quinlan from where the Irish Freedom Party, wherever he's from, Patrick Quinlan, and he just gave an impassionate plea for them to calm down and think about what they're doing and can you please stop and let's all rethink this and then he turned his back to walk away and then they charged at him. I mean, that doesn't make any sense to me. Tony, thanks for that. Sorry, Madeline, hi, how are you?
Hi, Niall, how's it going? Two quick points I want to say before I go into this little rant. I want people on the north side of Dublin are definitely the salt of the earth, and I condemn all violence from anywhere. But on the day I was there, as you know, the very stature of the Gardaí was confrontational. They were put there to incite people, as far as I'm concerned. These thugs, these missile-firing thugs, are the same thugs who engage in antisocial behaviour all year round. They've never been dealt with by the law because we don't have any proper law and order in this country. Parents don't go to riots with children. They go to peaceful protests. And then, as you know, the antisocial behaviour takes over and then a lot of people just walk away. But I mean, I seen two and all coming out last night and supposed to be approaching people about bringing their kids. People do not. Mothers don't bring their children to riots. They go to peaceful protests. The other day, the Gardaí they're all supposed to be trained. They have PPE. Their job was to keep the peace. But my God, when those vans pulled up, they provoked the situation. Didn't agree with what happened at all. Agree with Malachy and your Morris earlier on about community police, and it's gone, and I don't think it'll ever be repaired.
By the way, I agree with Malachy on most things, but what I disagree with Malachy on is that you have to condemn violence when you see violence. Because if we because if we don't condemn that, no matter what side of the debate you happen to be on, if you don't condemn that, you're giving it a free pass, and you cannot give a free pass to bad behaviour.
No, it's wrong, and the situation will never be resolved with, with fighting fire with fire. But you're answering the question, what are we to do? We have to stop the plantation, because that's what it is. We don't need it. We don't want it. Our country is way too small. And I did interview a lot of people from Coolock the other day. In fact, some of the people who live right beside Crown Pains, they have had no engagement with anybody from government, TDs, local councillors. The first thing they knew was when the police knocked at the door to tell them to get out of their houses because their trees were on fire. And these people had lived in these cottages for over 100 years, and they are, as Suzanne said earlier, then people are in absolute shock at what's gone on. And you saw Ben Scallon uncovered some paperwork the other day where the government were told there was going to be a total breakdown in social cohesion when this happened, and they've continued to do it. And Helen McEntee doesn't speak for me, and how dare she be so defiant when she's talking about she's going to continue with this at our expense, at Irish people's expense. Hypocritical what they're doing. They're importing people from so-called war-torn countries while they've declared war on their own. So it's so hypocritical.
Well, mind you, I mentioned there at the start of the show that there's an increase of 93% of people this year compared to last year, and the vast majority of people are not. Where I had it on my list there. The vast majority of people are from Nigeria, Jordan, Pakistan, Somalia, and Bangladesh. They're not countries where there's a war, by the way. Can I just point out? So, but most are economic migrants. Yeah.
Yeah, these people need assistance. But what about all the Irish people? Is nobody looking at the horror and the sadness and the fear at the people, at these mothers and their children up at these protests? They all have jobs that they need to be doing. Just people stopping out of work and being sick out of work because they're going to these protests. Do you think people enjoy this? Standing up there for hours on end? They literally want to protect their children. They want to protect their grandchildren.
Okay, thank you for that, Madeline. And then we go to John. John, hi, how are you?
Hi. Look, where do you start? To me, and it was mentioned earlier on there by John McGuck, I think the government, this particular government, as Marion has said there, were the worst bunch of traitors ever, between Martin, Varadkar before him, Harris and McEntee. And war has now been declared on the Irish people, and the international press are picking up on this. This is only going to get worse. Micheál Martin was on this morning about lone wolf attacks on politicians. Well, it just keeps...
Now, John, let's not go down this road. And there should be no lone wolf attacks on politicians. There should be no...
That's what I'm saying. But I would condemn that.
Yeah,
but I mean,
good.
I can see how something is going to happen.
Yeah, well...
If this is going to continue on...
Well, let's not incite anything like that. I mean, because that we should all condone. There should be no attacks on politicians, personally, or their families, or anything like that, or threats to politicians. You can threaten their policies, but you can't threaten the person. That's the way I look at it, right? I don't agree with Helen McEntee. I don't agree with Roderick Gorman. I don't agree with Micheál Martin or indeed Leo Varadkar when he was there and their policies, but I don't have any personal grudge against them as a human being, right? That's the way it has to be, because that's the way politics must operate. Now, what they're doing at the moment, I believe, is reprehensible. I don't disagree with you, John. It is reprehensible. Your job is, you're an elected representative to represent the people that voted for you. And as far as I'm concerned, the people of Coolock are quite entitled to representation, but they're not getting representation. Nobody is talking.
And they're not getting represented either by the likes of Mary Lou McDonald and the people higher up in Sinn Féin that could be the next government.
Well, Sinn Féin did say the other night, mind you, I don't think Sinn Féin are just doing it for votes. They said the other night that it wasn't right to be moving in, bulldozers and stuff in the dead of night at 4:00 in the morning, So that was kind of...
Yeah, but my point is, why aren't those members of Sinn Féin, besides paying lip service, why aren't they standing there at 4:00 in the morning? We got up for us and we ignited the whole water
because
campaign.
Sinn Féin are hedging their bets. Sinn Féin don't know which way to go. They're a lost party. So Sinn Féin, I mean, the people of Coolock would have been Sinn Féin's core voters. But not anymore. Not anymore. Not since, and I've noticed that in the European elections. But here's the thing. There
was a good point made yesterday by a regular caller, Angela Derry, and she talked about a nationwide stoppage. It's going to take something like that where all the people of Ireland are going to and get world attention on this and say, this is it now, no more. Because they're walking all over the people, the sovereign Republican people of this country. They don't give a crap about the Irish people at this stage. They are at war with their own people, and they cannot be allowed to get away with it.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Let me just go to Norman. Norman, hi, how are you doing?
Hi.
Yeah, now Norman, you'd be pro-immigration anyway, wouldn't you? Yeah.
Yes, I'm very, 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 very pro-immigration. Yeah, 100%.
Okay. But so what's your view of what's happening in places like Coolock and Newtown, Mount Kennedy, and other places around the country? What's your view of what's happening?
It's very simple. Very, very, very simple. If you have the facilities and the buildings and the services, like doctors, schools, blah blah, then you can move in people from wherever. But if you don't have them, then it's pointless. It's madness. It's irresponsible, and our government have been grossly irresponsible, taking in 140,000 Ukrainians from a so-called war zone, even though the war has been going on the last 10 years, and they ignored that for whatever reason. So I've lived in countries where immigrants were there, and I've seen the problems arise. And, for example, going back 20, 30, 40 years, these problems are known, and yet the government is going ahead and forcing it down people's throats. That's not the way to do it. It's absolutely crazy what they're doing.
What do you think of what happened over the last 2 days, specifically in Coolock, which would be a disadvantaged area, which has its own social problems?
I know the area. Yeah, it's close to Darndale. There's huge social problems over there.
Yeah,
you barely have playgrounds for their own kids. So what they're doing, move them over to Foxrock or Dunleary or beside...
that won't happen.
What's the name?
That'll never happen.
Yeah. No, exactly.
Yeah.
But I can tell you that in Renly, they wouldn't be too happy about it.
No.
If you moved in... they wouldn't be too happy if you moved in 700 people from Crumlin. They'll mind from another country.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be all right to move in 10 or 20 into a small guest house somewhere around there because nobody will notice it. But, if there was a big warehouse across the road from Bono's house and you moved in 500, I don't know how that will sit well with Bono and the gang in Killiney.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's no good for the people who live there, and there's no good for the people you're trying to put there. For the immigrants, there's nothing there for them. There's no facilities. So they'd be standing around all day doing nothing, looking for something to do.
But this is the problem. And look, that's what we're seeing all over the country. When you put large numbers in, they just hang around in gangs because they're bored and they've nothing to do.
Yeah.
They hang around drinking and doing whatever it is that blokes do at that age.
Yeah, of course. What else do you expect? I see it here in the... where I live, there's some tennis courts and there's always kids hanging around and there's glass all over the place every weekend because the kids have nothing to do. That's just our local kids. But what totally annoys me totally with the government is they say we have to take in immigrants or we have to take in Ukrainians who are obliged to. That's utter bullshit. That's a lie. That's not.
No, they say they have an obligation under the European Union to stay. They don't have an obligation. So I've spoken to barristers who said that's not true.
It's not true, no.
But I think what Ben Scallon produced there in Gip Media over the last 2 days was quite interesting. That this paper that was drafted that advised the government if they continue to do that, it would have huge damaging effects on social cohesion. And yet they knew this. This was back in 2022 when they suggested this in the first place, but they still went ahead and did it. That just goes to show you the disrespect they have for the people.
And there was same to water charges when you put in $500 million worth of useless water meters. And use the guards to beat up people.
I mean, look, we all know now. So those water meters were put into the ground. I believe the lifespan of a water meter, by the way, if it's not being used, is 15 years. So in another 5 or 6 years' time, those water meters will all have gone to waste. And the billions we spent putting them into the ground and they're not being used. And Norman, thank you for that. Let me just go to Jonathan. Jonathan, hi. How are you doing?
Hey, Niall, how are you getting on today?
Good. Jonathan, let's focus on the last 2 days. The newspapers are making it out this morning, those damn pesky far right. Look at them out there wrecking the place.
The last 2 days, it was predictable what happened, wasn't it? It was predictable.
Well, it was predictable.
I seen it coming. We all seen it coming. We know the tactics now. The state don't care. 10 million is the number now. That's the number they kept throwing out. 10 million. Ireland can hold 10 million. 10 million. They're forcing people's hands now. They're going to drop a load more names of plantation centres all over this country and fuck off on their summer holidays. Mm-hmm. That's what they're going to do.
They said they're looking at up to 30 more buildings, large buildings.
They'll do it, and they'll piss off. And like I keep saying to you before, this is a numbers game. The people are going to realise there's only a finite amount of Gardaí in this country. And they cannot be everywhere. So who's going to pick up the slack when all this does come to a head? Because I think this is the year that this country is going to explode with all this now. What happened up there, right or wrong, that lad you were talking about earlier on, I listened to an interview with him, and he, as far as he was concerned, he was walking home from McDonald's when them three guards jumped on him.
Yeah, I don't know. Look, none of us will know. It's one person's word against another. That's entirely up to the guards. He's been charged under the Public Order Act, maybe, or something, because he was arrested and taken away. But look, it doesn't matter what he did or didn't do. It's irrelevant.
But the way they treated him is very relevant.
No, he didn't deserve to be treated like that. You're right.
No, and it goes back to me, it all goes back to me what happened down in Coolock that time with the pipeline, the way the guards went in that time.
Yeah.
That's when I seen where this state was going. They no respect. They hate us as far as I'm concerned. They hate the Irish people. We are nothing but a fucking...
Who hates them? The Irish government?
The government hates us. As far as I'm concerned, they
don't hate them all. They hate the ones that just won't do what they're told. They
treat us as a nuisance now. And that'll be all of us, because like the lady said before, these are going to be pushed out all over the country. And all these communities now that are talking about, the far right, they'll become the far right within 6-8 months' time. They'll all become the far right in 6 to 8 months' time, because they're going to push it. And like you said, the little town now, village, with 123 people and 300 going on top of them, like what happened in this down Varna and all that.
Yeah, tripling the population overnight, completely changing the demographic of the area.
No, it's the policy now. That's it. Like even with the EU migration pact, you've seen in the committee meeting with Sharon Keoghan, NGOs, all of them said don't do this. They all advised them not to do it, and still they pushed ahead and done it.
Now, there's nothing in the EU migration pact that they can't do right now, to be honest with you, including reception centres, faster processing and all that kind of stuff. Thank you for that, Jonathan. Let me just go to Tara. Tara, hi, how are you doing finally? Tara?
Hi, Niall, how are things? I'm furious. I'm actually seething over McEntee's comments. And how dare she be so obnoxious? She's basically telling us that she isn't going to listen. That alone is provoking people. And I mean, we all saw the footage of the Gardaí, but why didn't Drew Harris condemn that behaviour? Straight away, he and RTE posted on the protesters. It's like, I swear this government, they're trying to turn the country into North Korea with their bully boy tactics. But you know what? Even North Korea wouldn't allow themselves to be turned into a hostel. It's just, there's such a sense of hopelessness in the country, because it feels like unless you agree with the government, which are more of a dictating organisation at this point, unless you agree with them, you're on your own. The Gardaí, the governments, the media, they're not on our side. They're twisting things. And even say at the riots, I believe, now, I could be wrong on this, but I do remember hearing that wasn't there like a far left person who was behaving like an agitator in the protest to make it...
It's possible. I don't know for sure. But I kind of think it's irrelevant whether they were or not. Yeah. But here's the thing.
But it just feels like...
Tara, can I ask you a question? I think we have to be fair, and we have to condemn all violence, be it by Garda Síochána or by agitators or by thugs, because that's all, people who could create violence are just thugs. Now, I understand sometimes you push people into a corner and they will bite. You know what I mean? I understand that. I get that. Yeah. But in saying that, if we're going to do this, or if people want to protest, they should try their best to do it peacefully if they can. Unfortunately, what I'm seeing is quite heavy-handed policing, which I'm not familiar with in Ireland. I don't see that normally in Ireland, and I think it's unacceptable type of policing, and I don't think we should accept that. But you are right in relation to the government. You now have Roderick O'Gorman, Simon Harris and Helen McEntee essentially saying, we don't care what you're doing, we're pressing ahead with the plan.
Yeah, so I don't condemn violence, but I understand this because people feel like they've nothing to lose. There's no sense of hope there because they feel like, and you know what, more and more people are starting to speak out. So this is only going to get worse. So McEntee was clueless and stupid to say what she said about not listening or about that it wouldn't have any effect on their policies. Yeah. She needs to be meeting us halfway and not this crap of we're not listening to you, we'll do as we please. The time of that's not being accepted anymore. People are getting really pissed off. I mean, even if there are, obviously there's going to be genuine asylum seekers, but, at the same time, why are we responsible for them when there's other larger countries where they would be more culturally compatible? Why are we taking in everyone and anyone? And why isn't there a more strict policy? We've never had any answers to these questions. It just feels like it's a free-for-all. And a lot of the new arrivals, a lot of them have made it no secret of the fact that they're here for the benefits and they're here for the freebies. That's not on. We're being taken advantage of. If you want to move to Monaco, you have to have 20 grand in at least, is it 20 grand I think in the bank?
Well, it's the same if you want to go to America. If you want to get a visa, you got to have money in a bank account. Yeah.
You have to have a certain amount of money in the bank account, and you have to prove that you will not be a drain on society. Yeah. You have to prove,
well, you wouldn't be allowed, but if you went to America or Australia or Canada, you wouldn't be allowed to claim social welfare. If you lose your job, you can go home. You know what I mean?
The benefits are there for the locals. They're not there for the people who just arrive in to take advantage. So that's the way it should be done. That's why Monaco and the likes of them, they're thriving, whereas we're being rinsed, and it's ridiculous. So I can even though I don't condemn the violence, I can understand the anger. And you know what? I would question who the agitators were, because there is an agenda there. There are people who go out, and there are thugs.
I'm not saying that doesn't happen, Tara, and I've witnessed that in the past by the very far left agitators going out purposely to start trouble to get the right, the blame. But what I did witness over the last 2 days, you know, the majority of people in Coolock are decent, fine people, and they have concerns. I'm not going to lie to you. But there are a percentage of them there who are thugs, who are just looking for trouble.
And you're always going to have that.
Yeah.
But the riot squad, and I've said this for years, I've had arguments with Gardaí about this. The riot squads long have needed an overhaul. I was at the May Day riots in, I think it was 2004.
Mm-hmm.
And
you were there, were you?
I remember, I was there, and I was a member of the press. And we were all in our own section. And the riot squad come over, I was standing on the wall, I was holding a camera, and they start pulling me by the ankles, trying to pull me off the wall to them. It took another person to hit them off me. They've always been trying to incite violence.
But here's the thing. On that day, they attacked an RTE reporter. Do you remember that? He got battered across the head. Now, he later went on to sue Garda Síochána, and there was compensation paid out to a lot of people. But I remember, because I was on the radio at the time, the Gardaí were held to account for that. There was huge investigations into it, you know, and they were, in other words, the government at the time said, you cannot behave like this. This is not the type of policing we want in this country. But yet, we're now seeing that type of policing, and seemingly it's acceptable.
But you know what, there at the Dublin riots that happened, when was that? Was that
November
last year?
November.
Yes, yeah. I remember, and I was surprised, obviously the RTE didn't spot this. I tried to get the footage of it on the player, and they must have obviously edited it out. But I remember watching that on TV on the when it was being aired, and they showed, just before the clip cut off, you could see these two women walking away. Now, I'd say they were maybe in their 50s. They were not a threat. They were just walking away. They were walking down the street. You could see these two riot police. They were kind of walking up the street. One of them happens to look to his left. He sees these two women walking down the side street, and he charges after them and tackles them. And I remember saying to a guard of that, what was the point of that? They weren't a threat. They were walking away. They were not posing any kind of a threat. And he kept insisting, no, it's the riot squad's job to clear the area. But they were walking away. They weren't posing any threat. And if you have to clear an area, ask them to leave. Don't tackle them. Like, where's the violence coming from? What is the necessity of that?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you, Tara. Thank you for that. And finally, I got to go to Nicholas. Sorry, Nicholas. Go ahead. You're the last person on today, I think.
Hello, Niall. Can you hear me all right?
I can. Yeah, Nicholas, just your kind of summary of what's been going on, particularly over the last 2 days, I suppose.
Disgraceful would be the one word.
Good word.
Use. Orchestrated from the side of the government. I think McEntee was managing this through Harris, intentionally going out to basically beat the hell out of the local community. Their statements, both O'Gorman's and McEntee's statements, were appalling. Again, trying to say there was negotiations. I happened to hear a man who's part of a local organised group who said he was at the so-called negotiations last April. He said they weren't negotiations. They were just
telling them what's happening.
They were telling them what's happening. No negotiation, no discussion about impact on local community or anything. And then you have at least 3 months of peaceful protest, then an orchestrated agitation. I mean, it is chaotic. The migration policy is chaotic. I'll say one thing, Niall, here, just that hasn't been spoken about today. You had Carol McNeil, or whatever her double barrel name is, talking about doubling the Defence Forces money, and promoting them, saying that they become associate members of unions and so on. But if you look at the amount of military-age men who are being brought into this country, there's something going on here, Niall. If they're going to start increasing the defence budget, who are they going to employ? Who are they going to put in that increased military force, and for what purpose?
Yeah, well, I don't know if there's another agenda there, and I would hate to think that would be true. I've heard people say that. Look, the bottom line is it's uncontrolled immigration, right? And the government have to start taking control of it. They promised before the last elections, Simon Harris's very words were they were going to get tough on immigration. We now know that was just an election promise, because clearly they haven't. They've done nothing since. They haven't deported anybody. Well, they say they have, but very few. They're not deporting people properly. People are there are some people who have self-deported. The government are not dragging people to Dublin Airport and putting them on planes or anything like that. The bottom line is, there are people who need our support and our help who come from wars, and we have to have a fair immigration policy where we look after people. But the vast majority of the individuals that are coming in that are going to be put into Coolock and places all over the place are not. They're economic migrants. And we should have a faster processing system so we don't have to accommodate them anywhere. Just have a single reception centres where you bring people in, you basically process them in 2 or 3 days. It shouldn't take any more than that to get information from Eurodac, and then send them back to where they came from if you can't identify who they are. Simple.
Of course.
It's not that difficult.
There's an orchestrated rush to get as many in as possible, and you have to ask why.
Because here's the thing, once they go into accommodation, they're not leaving the country. That's it. They're here for good.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is why I think people throughout the country need to wake up and stop being manipulated by the likes of the media, the academics, and all the people with their fingers in the pie, so to speak, who are coming out and demonising these people in Coolock and Newtown and Kennedy and so on. These are good, honest, decent people.
Yeah, I want to be clear. The people who are throwing missiles or setting Garda cars on fire, they're not good, decent, honest people. They're just thugs, right? But you're always going to get that element.
Yeah, you're always going to get that element, but it will basically stay dormant unless you give it the right environment to come into force. And that's what happened here. It was intentionally pushed so the extremists there who will burn cars and will throw petrol bombs will come to the fore. And unfortunately, I can't come to any other conclusion than this is an orchestrated behaviour from McEntee, Harris, and all the various governments.
But by the very nature of the fact that you don't listen to people, when you stop listening to people and listening to their concerns, know the outcome of you not listening is going to be more problems, well, then you're part of the problem. You're not part of the solution. I mean, the answer, as I said to Malachy earlier on, the answer now is for somebody within government with a set of balls to turn around and say, right, Coolock, let's just put it on hold for a couple of weeks. We're going to meet with the people and talk to them and just calm the whole situation down. That's what a good government does.
Yeah.
But that's not what our government does.
What you're talking about is rational, common sense approach. It doesn't exist because there is an agenda there, and it's not spoken out loud. But there's definitely an agenda. Otherwise, what you're saying would happen. They would step back and say, "Whoa, we made a mistake here. We've agitated these people. We've created a social pressure cooker. We need to stop it." You even had councillors there trying to de-escalate, and they were pepper sprayed and that. Now, don't tell me Mr. Harris wasn't sitting back at HQ saying, "Oh, it doesn't matter about these elected representatives either."
Well, he probably was going, "It doesn't matter because they're only right wingers anyway." Sure, that's kind of the attitude, isn't it?
And just the other thing, Niall, which is really, really clear here, not just from the government, but from the people who are commenting online on their behalf, is that, and we have to face this fact, working class communities do not matter. Okay?
Well, you don't get, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael don't get votes from them, so.
They don't matter. They don't care about them. Otherwise you'd see Foxrock, Dalkey, and so on, and Malahide and whatever, Hove, all highly populated with these centres. They're not. Why? Because they matter to them, but working class people don't matter. And this is why working class communities need to really combine, get together some way and form some sort of, pacifist resistance to this carry on.
Well, an election is probably the way to do that, but unfortunately the election is coming up very, very soon, but people really don't have an alternative. What's the alternative? Sinn Féin? They don't really seem to be in people's corner either, do they? You know what I mean?
No, they're spouting out the same judgmental rhetoric about these people. It's appalling what's coming from Sinn Féin.
And by the way, they used to be, as I said earlier on, they used to be Sinn Féin's core voters. Listen, thank you very much indeed, Nicholas, and I appreciate you coming on the air and talking to us. Loads of messages going in. Jessica says, "I believe in protesting making a difference. It's a government choice to not listen to the people, and there are consequences for that." Karen says, "Killiney, Dalkey, Ballsbridge, Howth, Greystones, Dunleary, Castleknock, etc. Where are the iPass centres in these places? Dunshaughlin was where McEntee is." Stephen says, "The government aren't listening as usual. They never listen, but they listen to every complaint from every immigrant that arrives in the country. Remember this in the next general election." Maureen says, "Who is going to employ thousands of men here already coming and lots more on the way?" And I can go on and on. There's been so many messages. Another one here. Yeah, I have to play 2 voicemails. Okay, all right. Let me just play these for you as well. Okay. I'll just play this for you. Hold on.
Niall, I'm beginning to think that the local councillors knew exactly what was going to happen there, because that's going on since March. And I know for a fact because, like, in regards to something like that, up Airway, they were doing exactly the same thing. They were moving a load of them into the hotel. Someone was selling the hotel and everyone was going there, but that didn't happen. They got the families, they gave a few families houses in around the area, and then they moved them on to another district outside the county into a bigger facility that can accommodate properly and appropriate for them. And we also have many factories closed down over the years. You had Pfizer, you have Lakeland Dairies. There's other factories outside Dublin that you could have easily put them into. I strongly believe it's a holy disgrace the way people are living, putting them into shelters this day and age. But I also think that refugees and immigrants are milking all of this now, and it works all in their favour, while our own is getting more angry and getting more charge sheets and getting a bad name, and the place is beginning to look like the Bronx. Horrible it is.
Yeah, it is horrible. Absolutely. Somebody else says here in the message, it looks to me like Ireland is becoming like Italy, getting people in even if there is no space, increasing social instability for illegal immigrants and locals to fuel up fear and racism. By the way, I know you are not, somebody says, not used to violent protests, but as Italian, that was a very soft protest. That comes in from Lorenzo. Lorenzo, yes, well, I suppose in Italy they would be more used to it than we haven't seen those type of protests. Ray says, what happened to media impartiality? The police watchdog should be invited to view the police behaviour. People that have suffered police brutality should make formal complaints. People should sit peacefully and block roads and not engage in physically with the police. Absolutely. By the way, if you believe, by the way, that you've been treated badly during those protests and you didn't deserve the beating or the hiding that you got, or the hit, the baton across the head that you got, you can make a complaint, of course, to Garda Síochána. Remember that there is an ombudsman there. They're meant to be independent, so you can make a complaint to Garda Síochána if you believe you've been treated wrong. And by the way, I want to reiterate, I do understand the Garda Síochána have a job to do. And when protesters become violent and the guards have to fight fire with fire, I understand that too. And that's a difficult situation as a member of Garda Síochána. I wouldn't like to be a member of the riot squad. I wouldn't like to be there with, trying to pepper spray people or try to keep people back if they're throwing stones at you or whatever. That'd be a very difficult job. But you're trained to do that. That's your job. You have training. Well, at least I hope you have training to do that properly. And not to be pepper spraying old ladies and young children or men or randomly pepper spraying people. You choose your victim. And that's what Malachy talked about earlier on. There are rules, or John McGurk talked about, there are rules to using pepper spray. You just don't indiscriminately spray it on everybody. And I have seen instances where they just spray it out. And that's not the way it works either. You have to do things properly, and chasing after people, individuals, isolating individuals who are not resisting, and then deciding to give them a few, use your nightstick on them, indiscriminately for no reason at all, to me doesn't make a huge amount of sense. Maybe somebody can explain to me what happened in that particular incident, because everybody is talking about that particular incident because it happened to be captured on video. If that was a video I was watching online of some guy in America, for example, that happened to, I'd be horrified by it. And I'm equally horrified by it, that the Irish police would do that. No matter what the person did or didn't do beforehand, nobody deserves that type of treatment. That's not good policing, as far as I'm concerned. Maybe they think otherwise. Anyway, thank you to everybody who got involved in the show today. Really, really appreciate it. We had so many people on, and it's so important, by the way, as you heard somebody mention earlier on, including John McGurk, between Grip Media and ourselves, nobody's giving the other side of the story. Look at all the papers today. All it does is villainise people of Coolock. That's not what we're out to do. We're out to let people have their opinions, find out exactly what went on, and take people to task. And if it's the government that should be held responsible for actually creating this problem in the first place and creating the atmosphere for this to happen, well, then they have to be taken to task as well. And we have to be allowed to have an opinion on that. So it's really important we have the podcast. It's really important that you have Grip Media. It's really important that you have these kind of outlets rather than just the mainstream media. So please do support us. We can't do it without your money because it costs money to do it. We've bills to pay. We don't charge you for the show. It's free. You're watching it for nothing now. There's no advertising behind me. So, there's no charge for you watching it right now. So please support us. Go to our website, niallboylan.com. Small donation, price of a cup of coffee, just a £5. That'll do us. and we'll share the fiver between the three of us who don't get paid. We just want to pay the bills so we can keep doing this and giving you this opportunity to come on the air. Please go to the website, niallboylan.com. You can either subscribe or you can donate there. Thank you very much indeed. Appreciate it. We should talk to you again tomorrow, same time. Until then, have a great day and be careful out there.
The multi-award-winning Niall Boylan Podcast. Listen live on Facebook, YouTube, and all the usual live stream services. To get in touch, just WhatsApp or text 085 100 2255. The Niall Boylan Podcast. They told me to shut up. Available for download from all your usual platforms.